I have a question from Dancer Daya. What is the simplest and easiest way to realize our true being? What is the easiest way to realize this essence of ours, which is unconditional love, deep peace, happiness? Thank you for the question. So the easiest way is whatever way works. But the easiest way that has worked for me, and it will be different for everyone, but there will inevitably be some resonance with the pathway that has been trodden here. For it reveals the reality of this true being, this peace, happiness, love. For me, the easiest way is simply to be. And from this being, inquire, what evidence do I have that I am limited or separate? What evidence is there right now that consciousness is separate from reality? That consciousness is limited. And to understand that all the evidence that would appear to suggest that consciousness is separate or limited is manufactured by thought. And the understanding that thought does not have access to consciousness, just as a character in a movie does not have access to the screen. The character is limited to move within and interact with only the domain of the movie. The character cannot step out of the movie and touch the screen or interact with the screen to take a sample of the screen and determine its attributes. Likewise, the mind cannot take a sample of consciousness in order to determine its attributes. For the mind is an illusory appearance within consciousness, made of consciousness. But the mind can only interact with its own definitions and concepts. It can only describe the things that it describes in the first place. For prior to the mind, there are no descriptions, there are no concepts. It is only when the mind arises that there are concepts and descriptions. The mind describes only the attributes of its own activity. It cannot describe or know consciousness. Only consciousness knows consciousness. So all the evidence that appears to give the impression that consciousness is separate and limited is fabricated by thought. To leave aside all thought by simply not referring to it and only experiencing pure consciousness, only being conscious of consciousness and staying here. What is true of consciousness? Is there any evidence that it is disturbed? Thought may say that it is disturbed. But what say you, consciousness? Are you disturbed? And see that consciousness is not disturbed. Consciousness is not moved. It's not moving. It simply is. And that pure isness that doesn't change, that always is peace itself. Is there any evidence in this consciousness, as this consciousness, that consciousness is lacking or incomplete without referring to any thought, just experiencing pure consciousness? No. The idea of lack and the idea of incompleteness is for thought. Consciousness, in its own consciousness of itself, has no experience of itself lacking or incomplete. And as such, this consciousness is happiness itself. Is there any evidence in consciousness intrinsically, if we don't refer to thought, that tells consciousness that it resists itself, that it is separate from itself? No. Resistance and separation are concepts that pertain to the mind and its activity, that are limited within the mind. But consciousness is not limited within the mind. Consciousness is present, like this screen contains the movie. Consciousness contains the mind. The mind does not contain consciousness. The mind does not know, using its concepts, what consciousness is. if we leave aside the idea of resistance and separation, knowing full well that they are not essential to consciousness. What is true of consciousness? Is consciousness resisting its presence? Is consciousness separate from its presence? No. Consciousness is itself, inseparable from itself, unconditionally. And that is love, unconditional love. To always be oneself. Without the possibility of stepping out of oneself to initiate a resistance towards oneself. Consciousness is itself, and that is love. So the simplest and easiest way to realize our true being is to inquire into consciousness's own consciousness of itself. What is my self's experience of itself, purely and simply, without reference to the mind, knowing full well that the mind cannot tell me anything about the nature of myself. The mind can only speak about the mind. Well, we may have an objection to this statement and argue that all of these words that have been uttered have been expressed through the mind. And that's true. All of these words are expressions utilizing the mind, but they are referring to an experience of consciousness which transcends the mind. Here, consciousness is conscious of its nature and is expressing through words, through the mind, a way of dropping the mind by asking a question using the mind that does not refer to the mind, such as, what is the nature of consciousness to itself? As we leave aside the mind. The yes or no that arises in us as a certainty, as the answer to the questions we ask of consciousness, is an answer that is silently confirmed. It does not require us to say yes or no in the form of a thought or an utterance. We already know the answer silently in ourselves. So, knowing the true nature of consciousness is not dependent upon whether we say what consciousness is, whether we say that it is limited or unlimited. Consciousness, in fact, is not limited by either of those concepts. It is present, conscious of itself in its entirety before the concepts of limited or unlimited arise. So in consciousness of itself. It doesn't know whether it is limited or unlimited, because these terms are ideas that are not intrinsically present within itself. Consciousness simply is and doesn't know what it is in terms of limitations. or even the concept of being unlimited or infinite is a limitation, in the sense that that concept can be compared with limitation. Consciousness is absolutely transcendent to all concepts. And as such, it is unlimited without knowing itself as the word unlimited. The best the mind can do to describe consciousness is to say it is unlimited. And of course, when the mind tries to describe what consciousness is, it always fails. So these words, they're coming from consciousness, from consciousness's own experience of itself being the only one present. The closest word that I have found is unlimited or infinite. But when that statement is uttered, that consciousness, I am unlimited, infinite, it is not the mind that is knowing that. It is consciousness that knows its nature and expresses that nature in the most unlimited expression of limitation that's possible. The most free expression of limitation that's possible. That is the most free expression of manifestation. And in our human language, in English, the word unlimited, infinite, is the closest to absolute infinity.